From the WATE.com Digital Center, answering your legal questions. This is Ask Isaacs. Now, here's Lori Tucker and attorney Greg Isaacs.
Hi, everyone. Lori Tucker here, along with our legal analyst, Greg Isaacs. Always good to see you.
Good to see you, Lori.
Today, we're talking about President Trump bringing in the National Guard. We are going to be digging into the legality of that executive order. For a little background here, it was signed August 11th, declaring a public safety emergency and mobilizing the D.C. National Guard to quote, restore law and order within Washington, D.C. Greg, before we get into what may be happening next, let's talk about D.C. Deployment there has now been extended through the fall. So let's talk about how expensive that is.
Some estimates, Lori, are saying that it is costing $1 million a day.
A day.
A day. But, you know, when there's talk of employing federal troops and the National Guard in high crime areas throughout the United States, there are two areas where this debate started, and there's different legal justification in each. And let's start with the District of Columbia. So the District of Columbia is a world or a creature in and of itself because it's not a state, and it has certain rights, and it's governed by the Home Rule Act. And so there are unique rules as it relates to the District of Columbia. And the authorization to employ National Guard is the head of the National Guard in Washington, D.C., and that person is appointed by the president. So interestingly, and the criteria for under the Home Rule Act in D.C.
And explain the Home Rule Act for people who don't know.
It carved out what the District of Columbia is because, you know, it's where our capital is, so it has different rules, regulations, because you have a different general population. You have, you know, the president, our hall of government. You have senators, congressmen. You have the Department of Defense. You have the Pentagon. You have, if you drive to Washington, embassy after embassy after embassy. So it is a world in and of itself. But
That's true.
Here's what the D.C. Code, Section 49103, provides. The National Guard can be deployed to Washington, D.C. to quell a tumult, a riot, a mob, or a body of men acting together by force to commit a felony or offer violence against person or property, to resist the laws, and when such tumult, riot, or mob is threatened.
And that's where the argument comes in. And we'll get into that a little bit more. But the National Guard was brought in on January 6th. Mm-hmm. It was brought in for Rodney King back in the day, George Floyd, all those different people who are against it are saying, why now?
Limited situations from our history, and it happened recently in California with the protest in the Northern District of California on ICE raids. But
against Governor Newsom's
desire. But we saw
that's the word
with Rodney King when in California when there was a request for assistance, so you had federal troops. There was also during President Johnson, during the civil rights riots, deployed federal troops.
And that was in Alabama, and the governor then didn't want it.
Didn't want it. So throughout our history, there has been a limited but controversial deployment of federal troops when you have flashpoints of violence, mobs, etc.
But where's the flashpoint now?
What is unique in this situation is the premise is failure to address and enforce the laws, and so now that has created a crime wave or an epidemic because the local law enforcement can't handle it. That is requiring federal assistance.
Even though local law enforcement has said, and this has come under fire, but it has said crime actually is down over the last 2 years there.
That is true. Now,
I bet you want to talk about impact since troops have been deployed.
Let's talk about impact since troops have been deployed. And it's interesting how they get these statistics. But from August 7th to 25, but that's only a 3-week window. Reported violent crimes have dropped 51%. Reported burglaries have dropped 48%. And reported car thefts have dropped 36%. Now, to add fuel to the fire, what President Trump is seeking to do is to have juveniles that are committing violent crimes in D.C. tried as adults, and that's a series of laws and constitutional protections in and of itself, and also to require the death penalty for homicides, which is, again, another landmark situation. So what you're seeing is putting the federal government putting the District of Columbia under a Hubble telescope and saying, we are going in to have law and order. But
aren't a lot of these arrests, aren't a majority of these arrests that troops are a part of involving ICE?
Well, the statistics that are evolving, and again, this is new. So, and it's really interesting too. And when we had Phil Keith, ex-chief Phil Keith on our show, he was talking
from
about
KPD,
from the Knoxville Police Department, and he was also over the federal police agency, which works directly with and under the Attorney General of the United States. The method and manner of reporting can drive crime statistics. And if you look at the statistics that are dropping, it didn't say crime was dropping, it said reported crime is dropping. But here's the debate as we talk about...
And in some cases reported violent crime.
Right. As we talk about D.C., which is different than California, and if we go into Illinois and Chicago or whatever, different constitutional touchstone. But what we're hearing is this is a pretext for ICE enforcement and immigration. And in doing so, what the critics are saying is they're juxtaposing crime statistics of other major cities, whether they're red, whether they're blue, and saying, hey, this does not justify this federal reaction, but what you're doing is using crime as a guise to sneak in federal troops for immigration enforcement.
And some say have a police state for everyone.
And some say have a police state, but you know that you can speculate, you can conjecture, and when you look at this from a legal lens, I think what you have to do is take the politics and the political science and history out of it, and talk about whether it's constitutional and whether it's legal.
And is there a real need?
And is there a need? Now, interestingly, and you may know something I don't, when you invoke the Home Rule Act to employ the National Guard in D.C., that only lasts 30 days and can be renewed. And I think that 30 days is up the 12th.
And I believe it's been extended through November 30th for D.C.
And it may be.
That's the latest we reported.
I think last week, actually, it was. No, he's expected to. I don't know if you can do it prior to its expiration, but I doubt that he's going to get any pushback from the individual that he appointed as the head of National Guard.
Okay. Having said all of that, President Trump has also announced tentative plans to send National Guard troops to other cities like Chicago. So, of course, we here locally wanted to ask the question, what about Tennessee? The FBI says Memphis is the most dangerous city in the country, Nashville coming in at number 13.
Right. Well, let's talk about this. So D.C. is the issue of home rule.
Correct.
D.C. is not a state, it's a district. But now recently we had the deployment of federal troops in California because of a response to ICE immigration raids. Now that's a whole different constitutional standard, because to do so in that context, the president has to invoke the Posse Comitatus Act, and that's also known as the Insurrection Act, and that allows the president, regardless of a governor's consent, so we're talking about whether governors consent or don't consent.
Which again, Governor Gavin Newsom did not give his consent for this in California.
But let's, as they say Sunday morning, read the word together on the Insurrection Act. You're allowed to use military force to enforce federal law or suppress a rebellion against federal authority in a state to protect a group of civil rights when the state government is unwilling to do so. Now, the issue is not whether they are capable of doing so, but whether they are unwilling. And a lot of historians, a lot of lawyers, a lot of jurists are saying a rebellion in that context typically means a federal action where another state, nation is trying to commit an act of violence here on our home soil. So what the interesting constitutional debate is going to be, again, D.C. is a world in and of its own, whether the president can use the Insurrection Act or the Posse Comitatus Act to deploy federal troops
in other cities.
And just suddenly go, I declare a rebellion against federal law. And in
he
doing
could do
so,
that.
yeah, well, no. He can and can't. So look what happened in California. They file, and Gavin Newsom was vocal, would be a huge understatement.
Yes.
He was very vocal and very vitriolic in voicing his disapproval for federal troops and saying, hey, we can handle this ourselves in California. And so they went to court, and Judge Breyer has granted an injunction, and those federal troops are supposed to be out of there, I believe, on September 12th.
All right, so we're watching that. That's coming up this week. We'll let you know what happens there. In the meantime, let's bring it back to Tennessee and possibilities here and what's being talked about. Let's hear from reporter Tori Gessner, who lays out the issue in a report she filed recently.
When it comes to cracking down on crime, Governor Bill Lee says Tennessee's efforts top the list.
There's a real concerted effort to make our streets safe.
From crime intervention grants to expanding the Tennessee Highway Patrol, even working with federal agencies like the FBI and U.S. Marshals in Memphis to tackle the problem. Recent data from the city of Memphis shows crime is down 15%. But new FBI numbers still say in 2024, Memphis had the highest violent crime rate per capita in big cities nationwide.
I'm going to think about Memphis, too.
President Donald Trump telling conservative radio host Todd Starnes he may send federal troops there to help.
I can put that early on the list, and I'm sure the people would love it.
Republican Senator Marsha Blackburn says blue cities like Memphis need all the help they can get to combat violent crime, issuing a statement which reads in part, quote, I'm grateful for President Trump's tremendous work to hold leftist officials accountable for putting their own citizens at risk by pushing soft on crime agendas. But Governor Lee says deploying the National Guard to Memphis or any Tennessee city isn't necessary.
Well, there are no circumstances that currently exist that we believe warrant that. So we're not talking about that right now. It's not a consideration for us right now.
Adding the only conversations he's had with the feds have been with agencies like the FBI about how their efforts in Memphis and Shelby County are working. Reporting in Nashville, I'm Tori Gessner.
All right, so that kind of laid the groundwork. That was a week or so ago. Now let's have this follow-up from Tori on where things stand now. And more voices are joining the chorus.
Talks about sending the National Guard to Memphis continue, this time with Republican Congressman Andy Ogles and conservative radio host Matt Murphy on 99.7.
We've got to revisit this conversation about crime in America, drugs in America, and how do we root out this problem.
Ogles says the National Guard is an option, writing in a post on X in part, quote, we don't just need the National Guard in Memphis, send them to Nashville. Murphy pressing him with questions.
When you say send them to Nashville, who are you speaking to?
Again, this is a conversation that the president can have with the governor about how do we move forward.
Have you called the governor?
I have not called the governor.
Well, why not?
Because I don't have the authority to call it the National Guard, but I can have an opinion, which is
the governor does.
Governor Bill Lee initially telling reporters there's no need to deploy the National Guard to Memphis, softening his stance yesterday.
There is nothing that is off the table. Everything is a possibility, and we are aggressively pursuing the right strategy to lower the crime rate in Memphis.
Ogles, who has yet to introduce a bill in Congress that's become law, also posting on X, quote, "If woke mayors can't run their cities, MAGA will do it for them. Send in the troops," referring to Nashville Mayor Freddie O'Connell and reports of a recent attack on a pedestrian bridge in Nashville. He tells Murphy deploying the National Guard has worked in D.C., and it can work in Tennessee cities too.
If you can clean up Washington, D.C., which had one of the highest crime rates in the country, except for maybe Memphis and Louisiana and New Orleans, it can be done all over this country.
Right, except the law might be getting in the way of the president's ability to do that based on the 10th Amendment of the Constitution, which is why I referred to it. The 10th Amendment doesn't apply to the District of Columbia, but it does apply to the state of Tennessee.
Ogles making a call to action on social media and TV, admitting that's where his action ends. Reporting in Nashville, I'm Tori Gessner.
All right, so there you have it. Your response to the 10th Amendment argument here. Let's explain that further.
Well, it's interesting. Congressman Ogle calls a radio talk show host. He gets on Twitter and he gets on X, gets on the Insta, but he doesn't call the mayor of Memphis. He doesn't
or
call
the governor.
Governor Lee. Says, hey, I don't have the authority to do that. But you know what? Then he gets publicity, gets on TV. And here's the thing. Conversations I've had in the past with former Governor Bredesen in analyzing crime and looking at somewhere like Nashville. He said the way to combat crime is to create more business, more people, more lights, things that people that want to commit crime run away from. When you have, an overwhelming amount of a police presence, it deters tourism, growth, et cetera. So, everyone, and here's the issue, is for law enforcement and everyone to feel safe and whatever. But here's what you can't lose is throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Let's violate the 10th Amendment. And then what are we going to do with these federal troops? Are they going to show up at our city county buildings in Sessions Court when they arrest someone and be here? And are they going to work with the district attorneys? What we should do is fight crime systematically. And instead of calling the mayor of Memphis or the mayor of Nashville woke or blue or whatever, let's call them the mayor and let's talk to them about a dialogue on how you can increase a law enforcement
in a
presence.
Civil fashion.
In a constitutional fashion.
Correct, but
for
calm voices prevail.
Right. And just let's not call up, shock jocks and talk shows or get on Instagram and say MAGA's going to fix it. Yeah. Well, who's going to fix it is the boots on the ground, and that's the police officers and whatever. And it's interesting, while Memphis, FBI statistics show Memphis #1 of crime in the country, Nashville number 13. But Knoxville has been singled out because of its new policing techniques as a model for the crime rate declining. And Lori, I don't know about you, but when I was at the courthouse this morning and drove to the station, I didn't see any federal troops. So, let's not be disingenuous. So are we going in because of high crime that we can't solve? And the other thing is, I think that's a slap.
And what does that do to police?
That's a slap in the face to all the hardworking police officers that risk their life every single day. But if we're doing it like they're ICE agents in sheep's clothing coming in here to help, round out people violating immigration laws, that's a different issue, but it's troublesome. Now, again, I don't care if you're red, blue, or purple. No one is for crime.
Right.
No one is for illegal.
Everyone wants to feel safe.
No one is for illegal immigration. And it's not a mayor that enforces laws. It's typically the head, the sheriff, the police department, the district attorney. And out of all this debate, and it's a great optic to have boots on the ground, ARs, and people goose-stepping down our country's streets, but we're not talking about the people that can solve the problem. So I'm a little concerned, be as hard on crime as you want to be. Be as proactive on immigration for those that are flaunting our immigration laws, but to violate the Constitution And there's a reason why we had that 10th Amendment when we signed the Declaration of Independence in our Constitution.
For those who don't know, explain the 10th Amendment.
Well, basically, that's where the origin of the Posse Comitatus Act and all that.
The home rule.
Basically, yeah, well, home rule is D.C.
Oh, that's
specifically.
D.C. Okay, that's
right.
true.
That's
That's
why
specific
the
to
10th Amendment,
district.
yes. You can't use federal troops to come into states.
This is what
It's-
applied to California.
Yeah, it's state laws. It's state enforcement. So what I think we're doing is we're confusing crime with politics, and we need to just focus on keeping everyone safe. But, I don't know about you, but when I'm going to a game at Neyland Stadium, I don't want to walk through 10,000 military men or with my kids, grandkids.
Guns at the ready.
Yeah, guns at the ready. So, that's kind of the legal thing we're dealing with. D.C., a different animal. An injunction has been granted against the National Guard in California, saying it violates the 10th Amendment and the Posse Comitatus Act. Are we going to see, and we just heard on September 8th, it hadn't gone into effect, but the Department of Homeland Security reports have announced Operation Midway Blitz in Illinois.
Yeah.
And tell us about that.
Okay, just turning up the heat, launching a new initiative targeting criminal illegal immigrants in Illinois. And this is what we learned on September 8th in a post on X. DHS said the operation was in honor of Katie Abraham. I don't know if you've kept up with that story. She was 20 years old from one of Chicago's northwest suburbs who was killed in a hit and run in January by 29-year-old Julio Bol, a citizen of Guatemala in this country illegally. That's according to published reports. So here's the quote. The ICE operation will target the criminal illegal aliens who flocked to Chicago and Illinois because they knew the governor and his sanctuary policies would allow them. So that's the genesis of this blitz. So it could be Chicago next.
And I think that would be an interesting and a well-deserved legal battle, and that is the legality of sanctuary cities and the legality and limits on ICE. So you don't need 10,000 stormtroopers, but again, if I'm a governor and I say we're not going to comply with immigration laws, illegally, I think that creates a problem. And
now, I don't mean to interrupt you. Have you noticed in each of these cases, D.C., there was the apparent attempted carjacking of a Doge member that apparently launched all of this, according to some resources within the Trump administration. Then you had the situation in California. It seems like there are, and in Nashville, they're talking about crime because of an attack on the pedestrian bridge. So it's like there's one hook.
Well, what you want to do is it's like when you see the State of the Union and you always have somebody when you're highlighting one of your accomplishments. Here is so and so when we rescued their son from whatever, and they're invited here and everyone claps. But this is an interesting issue. But again, not pro-immigration, anti-immigration, but the legally concerning issue is when you have these mass ICE raids. And again, if there's 100 violent criminals here illegally, God bless them as they hit the road. Mm-hmm. But in doing what I do and dealing with criminal records on a daily basis, I don't know that it's possible to drive by Home Depot and see a group of people standing outside and then somehow finding out if they have an outstanding warrant for a violent crime, et cetera, because typically illegal citizens, in my experience, aren't in the database. So the catch is, and the head of Homeland Security saying, every night I look at the stats and these are violent criminals. I'm just telling you, if you're Jose from Guatemala, Venezuela, whatever, and you're not in the system, you can't tell if that person committed a violent crime. So what they're doing is they're picking up out crimes, which is fine. Have no qualm in real time. And it's a tragedy and it needs to be addressed. If they're here illegally, they need to be deported. And for example, Knox County, let's use that as Tennessee, a microcosm. When people are arrested, it's very effective. There will be an ICE hold, and you can't get out. And when you go to court, it's
Ours
really,
is one of the detention facilities set up to house them.
yeah, to house them. So there's other ways, but the other thing that's interesting is we see all this focus, and again, I'm not apologizing the issue, but maybe legally the methodology. And so you're going to have this cadre of ICE agents, and I think the latest thing that there's public service announcements. If you sign up to be a member of ICE, you get a $50,000 signing bonus and your student loans forgiven. Now, I want to make sure when I'm going to Home Depot or Lowe's that this person that just got this huge signing bonus and is armed wearing a mask, I'm not going to get caught in the gunfire when they see somebody that looks like they, quote, ain't from around here.
On that note, let's take a quick break. We just have a couple of minutes left to continue this discussion. There are so many layers to this. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back, everyone. Glad you're with us today. Hey, before we let you go, we just want to reiterate the difference between D.C. and places like Chicago, places like perhaps Memphis, where federal troops could come in. What does the law say about that distinction?
D.C. is a world in and of itself, and it is created and governed by the Home Rule Act. It's not a state, but under the Home Rule Act, basically, if there is a body of men creating a riot, a tumult, whatever, then the National Guard can come in to keep the peace when someone's rights and safety are threatened. Now, separately, if you want to invoke the Posse Comitatus Act, the Insurrection Act, and it gets its constitutional origins in the 10th Amendment, which basically means all the rights not specifically enumerated to the federal government are reserved to the states, you have to do it in a limited basis to, quote, suppress a rebellion. And I think if you look at the historical context, rebellion meant rebellion.
Rebellion.
It meant people with red coats that were firing muskets.
There's no fuzzy line.
No fuzzy line. So here's the deal. Whether you're red, blue, or purple, no one's for crime. Immigration, whether you're soft on it, hard on it, if it's illegal, it's illegal. But let's not make create two wrongs to make a right. Enforcement should be done methodically, legally, and constitutionally.
All right. We will be watching this. Thank you so much for being with us. And let's talk more at 5:30 tonight.
Let's do it.
All right. Thanks.